Captain Elias Munro stood tall among the towering crystal pillars of the Hawaiian throne room, his earth-made diplomatic uniform sharp against the glowing blue walls as the alien Queen Syrexa, cold and statuesque, moved forward with her long, silent steps, her many eyes fixed on him with unreadable calm. And though the peace talks had gone well and the atmosphere seemed calm, Elias felt something strange pulsing beneath the surface, like the silence before a storm. And when the time came for the ceremonial gift, a tradition among the Uians to show trust and goodwill, he expected rare metals, ancient data, or perhaps technology. But instead, the Queen motioned to a quiet figure hiding behind one of the glowing columns, and out stepped a thin, silver-skinned girl with large violet eyes, no older than 14 by Earth standards, her head bowed, her hands folded, her expression empty, and the Queen spoke in her echoing voice, "This is my daughter, Karel, a gift to you, human, so you may understand our true offering." And though the room stayed silent, Elias's thoughts were in turmoil, because no treaty or mission, briefing had prepared him for this, and the idea of accepting a living being, especially a child, as a gift made his stomach twist. But Syrexa's gaze was fixed, her words final, and his assistant whispered that declining might be seen as a deep insult. So Elias, choosing diplomacy and sensing the girl's quiet desperation, nodded slowly and said, "Then she comes as my guest, not my possession." And with that, the room released its held breath, though Seal did not move until the Queen gave her the smallest nod, and then she followed Elias in silence, her bare feet never making a sound on the crystal floor. And as they boarded the Earth vessel Solstice Dawn, Elias kept glancing back at her, unsure of what he had just agreed to. And once they were off planet, Karel was given a small guest room where she sat still for hours, never speaking, never eating, just staring at the soft light that spilled from the ceiling. And Elias couldn't stop thinking about the look in her eyes hollow, but with something hidden deep behind the silence, something like fear or maybe hope. And as he reviewed the official Eucharian statement, it said Karel had been given as a symbol of peaceful unity, but there were no details about her background, her purpose, or why she had been chosen. And when Elias asked her gently why she had come, she only whispered, "Mother said I would be safer with you," before curling into herself on the corner of the soft bed, and Elias felt a chill, realizing that this was not a royal gift but an escape. At an escape, a silent exile dressed as honor, and for the first time since the mission began, Elias wondered if this treaty had more secrets than signatures. And as the ship moved quietly through the stars, a strange unease settled in the halls, not because of Karel's presence, but because of how silent and unseen she had been for so long, and he knew something important had just begun, even if he didn't yet know what. Karel moved through the Earth ship Solstice Dawn like a shadow without sound, her feet always light, her eyes never meeting anyone's gaze, and though the crew tried to be kind, she never answered their questions or reacted to their smiles, choosing instead to sit quietly in corners or stare out at the stars as if searching for something lost long ago. And Captain Elias Munro watched her carefully, not with suspicion but with growing concern, for there was something deeply broken inside the girl, something that went beyond shyness or confusion, something that felt like it had been carefully hidden for years, and when she walked past him one evening, without responding to his greeting, he gently followed her to the observation deck, where she stood with her forehead pressed against the glass, eyes locked on the distant sun. They were slowly approaching, and he asked her softly if she was afraid, but she only whispered, "It's warm," and when he asked what she meant, she explained slowly and awkwardly that she had never seen real sunlight, that the royal palace where she lived was built underground, shielded from the surface, and that her mother said light was for those who had earned it, not for those who were born wrong. And Elias felt a quiet rage build in his chest, but he said nothing, only sat beside her and told her about earth's skies, the sound of rain, the feel of grass. And though she didn't reply, her shoulders relaxed just a little, and over the next few days he began to notice small changes. She lingered near the crew instead of hiding. She tasted new food without needing to be asked, and once, while passing the medbay, she paused to watch a nurse bandage a scraped hand and asked, almost inaudibly, if it hurt, and Elias started to understand that Carell was not just neglected. She had never been allowed to feel, to explore, to live as a child should. And one night, while he was reviewing reports in his quarters, he heard soft music playing from the common room and found Carell sitting cross-legged on the floor, listening to a gentle earth lullaby on a small speaker, her eyes closed, her hands resting in her lap. And when she opened her eyes and saw him, she didn't move away, only asked, "Why do humans sing to their young?" And he answered simply, "Because it tells them they're safe." And she nodded, as if trying to remember that word safe, as though it had no place in her past. And the next day she helped the engineer carry tools, and when she accidentally dropped one, she flinched like she expected to be struck, but no one yelled, and that seemed to confuse her more than anything else. And later, when she sat quietly with Elias in the greenhouse, watching earth flowers slowly bloom under artificial sun, she asked if things really grew just because they were loved, and he told her yes, sometimes they did. And Carell leaned forward and whispered, "Then maybe I can grow too." And in that moment, the lights above them flickered softly, as if responding to her voice, and the ship's AI reported a slight spike in ambient energy, but nothing dangerous. And though Elias made a note of it, he didn't mention it to Carell, not yet, because for the first time she had spoken without fear, and he didn't want to scare her away from it. But that night, as he lay in bed thinking about her words, he remembered that the Eucharian royal bloodline was known to carry ancient abilities, strange, powerful traits that only appeared once in many generations, and he began to wonder if Carell's exile had not been about shame, but fear. And as the stars passed silently outside the windows, the ship gently hummed with life, and somewhere deep in its core, the systems responded to an unspoken presence moving softly through its halls, a presence that had never been touched by light, but now reached for it with fragile, trembling hands. Carell woke with a strange feeling in her chest, as if something had shifted inside her during the night, and as she sat up in her small room aboard the Solstice Dawn, she noticed that the small flower Elias had given her, just a simple earth daisy, had bloomed fully overnight, even though it had looked wilted the day before, and when she touched its petals gently, the lights above flickered once again, just for a second, and then returned to normal. But it was enough to make her pull her hand back and stare, confused and a little afraid, because this had happened more than once. Now devices responding to her thoughts, rooms warming when she entered, even the ship's AI pausing mid-sentence as if it was listening to her breath. And when she walked past the control deck later that day, the main screen glitched, briefly flashing a strange circular symbol before returning to normal, and Elias, who had been watching closely, decided it was time to act. So he asked Carol to sit with him in the medbay and explained that he wanted to run a small scan, just to check her health. And though she hesitated, she finally nodded, trusting him, more now than she had ever trusted anyone before. And when the scan results came in, Elias stared at the screen, his heart pounding, because Carell's brain activity was unlike anything he had seen. There were extra neural connections glowing like threads of light, and hidden deep in her mind was a rare pattern that had only been found in old Yarayan legends, something they called the Silent Spark, a dormant ability believed to belong to ancient protectors who could shape energy with thought. And Elias realized that Carell had inherited something powerful, something the Queen had likely tried to suppress or hide, and maybe that was why she had been kept underground, why she had been given away, not out of trust but fear. And when Elias showed her the scan and gently explained what it meant, Carell grew quiet, her hands trembling slightly, and she said, "Mother called me broken." But Elias leaned forward and told her firmly, "You're not broken, Carell, you're becoming." And that night, the ship's systems detected another spike, not dangerous but strange and calm, like a wave of quiet energy passing through the walls. And the crew began to notice her differently now, not as a guest or a lost girl, but as something more, someone changing. And while they didn't understand her powers, they felt them, like the way the air warmed when she smiled, or how doors sometimes opened before she reached them. And even the captain's dog, an old gentle hound named Radar, who had never liked Urians, followed her around the ship as if drawn by something deep and kind. But just as Elias began to believe she might be safe, a message came through space, sharp, cold, and official. It was from Queen Syrixa, and her voice, calm and emotionless, demanded the return of Carell at once, stating that she was unstable and unfit to remain outside the palace. And when Elias replied that Carell was not property, that she was living freely and peacefully, the Queen's response came quickly, "Then prepare for what she will become." And moments after the message ended, the ship's lights flared, alarms blared, and Carell screamed from her room, not in fear but in pain, her body shaking, her hands glowing faintly with silver light, as if her own power had been awakened too fast, too suddenly, and the crew rushed to help. But Elias told them to stay back, entering the room alone, kneeling beside her, and speaking gently until her breathing slowed and the light faded. And when she opened her eyes, tears running down her cheeks, she whispered, "I didn't mean to." And Elias held her hands and said, "I know," but deep down he now understood that this was only the beginning, that Carell's awakening was not something they could stop, and whatever lay ahead would not be easy, not for her, not for them, because power like this was never simple. And the Queen's words echoed in his mind like a warning and a truth all at once. Carell lay unconscious in the medical bay, her skin glowing faintly with that same strange silver light. And though the scanners showed no injury, her heartbeat was slow and uneven, as if her body was trying to hold together something that had been broken for a long time, and Elias stood beside her bed with worry pressing down on his chest, knowing now that Carol's powers were not just waking, they were rising too fast, and if they couldn't help her gain control, she might be consumed by the very thing that made her special. And the ship's AI, now strangely quiet around her presence, suggested a risky solution, a deep neural simulation, a link into her mind that could allow Elias to enter her thoughts, see the struggle from the inside, and maybe reach her before she slipped too far. And though it was dangerous, Elias agreed without hesitation, because leaving her alone in that pain felt worse than any risk. So he entered the chamber, let the machine take hold, and in the next moment, he was standing inside a dark, echoing space that looked like a hallway made of shadows and stone, and in the distance he saw Carol curled up against a cold wall, her eyes wide with fear, as a storm of voices screamed around her, all of them cold, all of them cruel, repeating the same words. "You are wrong, you are weak, you are unworthy." And Elias stepped forward, slowly calling her name, but every step brought more darkness, more noise, until he finally reached her, knelt down and whispered, "You don't have to listen to them anymore." And Carol looked up with tears in her eyes, whispering back, "It's her voice. It's always her voice." And Elias realized the voices were memory's echoes of Queen Cyrexa's harsh words, built up in Carol's mind like a cage, and she had believed them for so long that she didn't know how to escape. But Elias didn't fight the voices, didn't shout or strike them down. He simply held Carol's hand and said, "You are not what they called you. You are more. And I see it." And slowly, one by one, the voices began to fade, the shadows pulled back, and light started to form around them, soft and warm like the sunrise, and Carol stood up beside him, still afraid but stronger now, and she took a step forward on her own, then another, and as she walked, the memory hall crumbled behind her, breaking apart like dust. And when they reached the center of her mind, a space filled with mirrors, Elias told her to look not at the reflections, shaped by fear, but at the truth that she had always been kind, curious, and brave. And Carol finally understood that her power was not a curse. It had only grown wild because it had never been accepted, never been guided. And with that realization, her heart opened, not just in the dream, but in the real world too, and the monitors around her bed began to glow with steady pulses. Her breath returned to normal, and the silver light around her dimmed into a soft shimmer, as if it now listened to her instead of ruling her. And when Elias awoke from the simulation, he found her sitting up, calm and quiet, her violet eyes clear for the first time, and she looked at him and said, "I felt the darkness, but I found something inside it, something warm." And Elias smiled and replied, "That was your heart, Carol, the part of you they tried to hide." And word soon spread through the ship that she had recovered, and though the crew didn't fully understand what had happened, they could feel the change. Carol no longer walked like a shadow, but like a person who had chosen her path. And when she passed the garden room and the dying plants bloomed behind her, no one said anything, but everyone knew it meant something more. And it wasn't long after that a message arrived at the edge of human space, not from the Queen, but from her high advisors, warning that Eucharian ships had been sent to retrieve the girl, no longer calling her a daughter, only a subject of concern. and Elias knew they had little time, but before he could make a plan, Corell spoke clearly, and said, "I want to talk to them, not to fight, but to show them who I am." And in her voice there was no fear, only truth, and Elias nodded slowly, understanding that the girl who had once been left in silence had found the voice of a heart that refused to be quiet any longer. Sharian ships appeared just beyond the edge of Earth's space, their cold silver hulls reflecting the stars like knives drawn in silence, and aboard the Solstice Dawn, every crew member stood ready, not for war, but for the unknown as Corell stepped onto the main deck in a simple earth robe, her bare feet soft against the floor, her eyes calm and steady, and though she looked small standing before the massive screen that displayed the lead Yosharian vessel, her presence filled the room, and when the transmission opened, the face that appeared was not Queen Cerexa, but one of her high generals, who looked at Corell with no recognition of family, only duty, stating in a cold voice that the girl was to be returned immediately, as she represented a risk to galactic order. And when Elias stepped forward to protest, Corell gently raised her hand, silencing him, and took one step closer to the screen, her voice steady as she said, "I am not your prisoner, I am not your shame, and I am not your danger." And though the general sneered, saying she was just a child who didn't understand her own power, Corell replied, "No, I understand it now, and it is not for harm." And as she spoke, the lights on the ship dimmed gently, as if leaning in to listen, and the ship's AI, which had once been a quiet tool, now projected her voice with clarity and warmth, and Corell continued, "You left me in the dark and called it protection, but it was fear, not love, that kept me hidden. I do not belong to the shadows anymore." And for a moment there was silence on the line. Then the general warned that refusal to return her would be seen as a threat. But before Elias could speak, the unexpected happened. The signal was overridden, and Queen Cerexa herself appeared, her tall frame calm, her many eyes blinking slowly, and she said, "You speak well, daughter," her voice neither warm nor cruel, just unreadable. And Corell's hands trembled slightly, but she stood tall, saying, "You gave me away like I was nothing, but I found people who listened, who saw me." And the queen answered, "I gave you away because I could not bear what you would become." And for the first time her voice cracked with something close to emotion, and she added, "I was not strong enough to guide you." And the crew around Corell stood frozen, surprised by the honesty in the queen's words, and Corell replied, "Then maybe you will be strong enough to listen now." And she raised her hand, not in threat, but in peace, and a small shimmer of silver light glowed between her fingers, forming a floating symbol in the air, not of war, but of harmony, a shape taken from both Yosharian language and human writing, something new, something shared, and the queen stared at it in silence for a long moment before ending the call without another word. But the Yosharian ships did not attack, nor did they retreat. They simply stayed in place, quiet and still, as if waiting, and days passed with no movement. But then a second message came not from the queen, but from a Yosharian council representative, asking for a meeting with human diplomats, including Corell, to discuss the future of both peoples. And it was in that moment that Elias understood what had happened: not a battle, but a shift, not a war, but a crack in a wall that had stood for centuries, and Corell, once discarded and forgotten, had made it possible not by force, but by choosing to speak when silence was expected, and in the months that followed, she became a symbol not of power, but of change, attending meetings as an ambassador, not of Earth or Yisharia alone, but of something in between, something new, and even Queen Syrixa sent a message, short and strange, saying, "There is more to learn." And Carl smiled when she read it, not because it was warm, but because it was real. And as she walked the gardens of the new joint embassy built between two worlds, she watched the earth flowers bloom beside Yui and crystal vines, and she whispered to the wind, "They said I would destroy, but I built instead," and behind her Elias watched proudly, knowing that the girl he once found silent and lost had become something greater than any treaty could promise, a bridge, made of hope, born from pain, and held together by the heart that had finally made her whole.